In the 5th episode of the 3rd season of Better Call Saul, a man sits on a witness stand in an Albuquerque courtroom, sworn in, composed, winning his case. He is a respected lawyer. His name is on the door of one of the best firms in the state. 45 seconds later, in front of his ex-wife, his business partner, and a panel of bar examiners, he is screaming that his younger brother defecated through a sunroof in 1992 and that he should have stopped him years ago. The younger brother wins the hearing. The older brother is dead within the year. And a character that most of us first met as comic relief in Breaking Bad quietly becomes something nobody watching in 2009 could have predicted. The best-written character in the history of television. Tonight, across 10 sections, the full case for why Saul Goodman earns that title. Let us begin. Section 1. The name is the thesis. How its all-good man became the most layered alias in television. The name Saul Goodman is a pun. Peter Gould and Vince Gilligan, the two men who created the character, have confirmed this directly. When they were writing the Breaking Bad episode that would introduce this sleazy lawyer, they needed a name that would stick in the heads of dim clients who might be half drunk or just arrested when they were trying to remember who to call. So they built the name out of a phrase. It's all good, man. Say it fast, and it becomes Saul Goodman. Gould has credited Gilligan with the original idea, and both men have spoken about it in multiple interviews across the years. The name was never meant to sound respectable. It was meant to sound like reassurance, like the thing a shady guy says right before he takes your money. That single design choice turns out to be the key to the entire character. Most fictional lawyers get names that sound solid. Stone, Finch, Spectre. Something that suggests the man saying the name is someone you can trust with a very expensive problem. Saul Goodman gets a name that sounds like a sales pitch. A guarantee that cannot possibly be kept. A promise that everything is fine, delivered by a man whose whole job is to help you in situations where things are very much not fine. The name is a lie told in the open, and once you notice it, you start noticing that everything about this character works the same way. He is not hiding who he is. He is just hiding it loudly enough that you forget to look closer. The name is also not his real one. That part matters. In Breaking Bad, it is revealed casually, almost as a throwaway line, that Saul Goodman is a fake name and that his real last name is McGill. He is Jewish, he claims, because he thinks it helps him in the legal market in Albuquerque. He is actually of Irish Catholic background, from the Chicago area. The whole Jewish angle is a marketing tool. When Better Call Saul later gave the writers room to explore his backstory, this detail became a load-bearing piece of the character because it reveals something specific about him. He did not just pick a name, he built a brand. He figured out which demographic would respond best to a lawyer with a Jewish-sounding name in that part of New Mexico, and he invented one. He started dropping Yiddish words into his vocabulary, even though he had no cultural basis for any of them. By the 6th season of Better Call Saul, he is even accusing people of anti-Semitism when they refuse to give him what he wants. He plays up his fake Jewishness or his real Irishness, whichever one happens to work better in the moment. This is not a small thing. This is the behavior of a person who does not believe that any identity is fixed. A person who has concluded, somewhere along the way, that who you are is whatever the other person in the room needs you to be. That is a very specific worldview. It is the worldview of a salesman, or a con artist, or a lawyer who learned the law by taking correspondence courses and realized early that the case is not actually won by who is right. It is won by who is more convincing. Under the Saul Goodman name sits James Morgan McGill, Jimmy to the people who love him. Jimmy was born on November 12, 1960, in Cicero, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. His parents ran a corner store. He had an older brother named Chuck, who would go on to become a successful lawyer in Albuquerque. Jimmy grew up watching customers take advantage of his father, who was a gullible and trusting man, and he absorbed two lessons from that. The first was that honest people get taken. The second was that if you are going to take someone, you might as well be the one doing the taking. He started stealing small amounts of cash from his own father's register as a child. He grew into a small-time con artist in the Chicago area, where he picked up the nickname Slippin' Jimmy for staging fake slip-and-fall accidents. He ran a scam involving fake Rolex watches with a friend named Marco Pasternak. He was caught in a much bigger incident in 1992, when he defecated through the sunroof of a car belonging to a man he had a personal grudge against, not realizing the man's children were in the back seat. That last detail is important because it is the crime that brought him to Albuquerque. His brother Chuck, who was already a respected attorney, got him out of serious legal trouble on the condition that Jimmy leave Chicago, leave the con artist life, and take a job in the mailroom at Chuck's law firm. That law firm was Hamlin, and McGill. That is where the name McGill starts mattering publicly, because for the first time in his adult life, Jimmy was working under his real name, in a real job, trying to become a real person. He worked his way up. He took correspondence courses at a law school called the University of American Samoa. He passed the bar. He became a lawyer. And then he took his real name, his brother's name, the name McGill, and eventually threw it away. He replaced it with Saul Goodman. The show treats this as a small moment when it happens in the 4th season finale of Better Call Saul. Jimmy wins back his law license through an emotional speech about what his brother meant to him, then turns to Kim Wexler, the woman he loves, and tells her the speech was a lie. He is not going to practice under the name McGill. He is going to practice as Saul Goodman. She is horrified. The camera holds on her face while he walks away. That is the first time we see Saul Goodman actually arrive, and he arrives as a betrayal of the name he was born with. Then there is Gene Takovic, the third name, the one that comes after Breaking Bad, after Walter White's meth empire collapses, after Jimmy is too hot to stay in Albuquerque. He hires a man named Ed Galbraith, known in the criminal world as the Disappearer, who runs an identity wipe service out of a vacuum repair shop. Ed relocates Jimmy to Omaha, Nebraska, where he is given a new life as Gene Takovic, the manager of a Cinnabon inside a shopping mall. The flash-forward scenes showing Gene in Omaha appear at the start of almost every season of Better Call Saul. They are shot in black and white. They are slow, quiet, and almost unbearable to watch if you know what you are looking at. Because Gene is what this man becomes when there is no one left to be Saul for, and no one left to be Jimmy for. Gene is the silence after the performance. He lives alone. He eats dinner alone. He sits on his couch at night and watches old VHS tapes of his own Saul Goodman commercials and weeps quietly to himself. He is a man who has become so good at pretending to be other people that when the pretending stops, there is almost nothing underneath. So the count is 4. Jimmy McGill, the real name, the childhood name, the brother's name. Slippin' Jimmy, the con artist alias, the Chicago identity, the version that knows how to run a scam and does not feel guilty about it. Saul Goodman, the constructed lawyer persona, the flashy suits and the loud commercials, and the promise that it's all good, man. Gene Takovic, the Omaha ghost, the black and white survivor, the man who has no performance left. 4 names, 4 versions, and crucially, all four of them are the same person. The show never lets you treat them as separate. When Gene locks himself in a Cinnabon garbage room one night, he uses a loose screw to carve a small message into the wall. The message is, S.G. was here. Not Gene, Saul. Even in total isolation, even pretending to be someone else in Omaha, he cannot fully let go of the name he gave himself. He needs to leave a mark. He needs something in the world to know he existed. So he writes Saul Goodman into a wall that will probably never be read by anyone who knows what those initials mean. This is what makes the name work as the central idea of the character. Because every other television protagonist gets one name. Walter White is Walter White, even when he is calling himself Heisenberg. And the show is about the gap between the man and the alias. Tony Soprano is Tony Soprano everywhere. Don Draper is famously the man who invented a name for himself, but he only ever operates under the one. Saul Goodman is different. Saul Goodman is a character who wears identities the way other people wear clothes. And the show is not about the gap between the man and one mask. It is about a man who has no face underneath the masks anymore. The mask is the face. The performance is the person. And the tragedy is that somewhere behind all of it, buried under Slippin' Jimmy and Saul Goodman and Gene Takovic, there is still a scared man named Jimmy McGill who wanted to be a lawyer because he wanted his brother to be proud of him. You can see this in how the character speaks in different modes. Jimmy McGill talks to Kim Wexler with a softness that he never uses with anyone else. He slows down. He stumbles. He sounds like a real person with real feelings. Saul Goodman talks in rehearsed rhythms. He makes eye contact a specific way. He uses the same phrases over and over because the phrases are the brand. Gene Takovic barely talks at all. When he does talk, in his Cinnabon manager voice, he sounds tired and flat and 40 years older than the man shouting on the TV commercials. Bob Odenkirk, the actor, plays these as different vocal patterns. He gives each version of the character a different register. You can hear the character switching in real time, in scenes where he drops Saul and becomes Jimmy for a moment, or where Gene suddenly starts sounding like Saul because a scheme is forming in his head. The writer's room understood from the beginning that this was the engine of the show. When they were developing Better Call Saul, Gilligan and Gould have said publicly that they realized the Saul Goodman we saw in Breaking Bad was a man who was, in their words, comfortable in his own skin. He had nowhere left to go as a character. He had already arrived. What they could do was tell the story of how he got there, which meant going backward into Jimmy McGill and watching the person underneath slowly get buried by the person on the surface. Gould has called Jimmy an earnest, sweet guy whose brain naturally cooks up dishonest solutions to the challenges in front of him. That is the original state. Saul Goodman is what happens when the dishonest solutions stop being emergency measures and start being the default. When the mask stops coming off at the end of the day. The name is the thesis of the show for another reason. Because it's all good, man, is the lie every version of this character needs to believe to keep moving. It's all good, man, Jimmy tells himself after betraying his brother. It's all good, man, Saul tells Walter White as he launders millions of dollars for a meth empire. It's all good, man, Gene tells himself as he runs scams on dying mall shoppers in Omaha. The name is the mantra. Every time he says it, he is reassuring someone, usually himself, that what is happening is fine. That the thing he is doing is not as bad as it looks. That the body he is about to step over is not his problem. It is never fine. That is the joke inside the joke. The more often Saul Goodman has to insist that it's all good, man, the less good anything actually is. The phrase works as a barometer. In the early Breaking Bad appearances, when the character is mostly comic relief, the phrase feels harmless. By the time we reach Better Call Saul's 6th season, when Howard Hamlin is dead on the floor of Jimmy and Kim's apartment, the phrase can no longer be said at all. The name has finally caught up to the situation. Nothing is good. The man has been telling you this from the moment he introduced himself. The show understands that the name is also a sales pitch directed at the viewer. You watch Breaking Bad, you meet this loud lawyer in a bad suit, you laugh at him, you remember the name, you move on. You think he is the clown. You think he is there for the jokes. That is exactly what the name is designed to make you think. It's all good, man. He's just a funny guy. Don't worry about him. Then, 6 seasons of Better Call Saul unfold, and you realize you were wrong about this person in every possible direction. He is not the comic relief. He is the center. He was always the center. The name was camouflage. By the end, when the finale of Better Call Saul arrives, the character will do something almost no other television antihero has ever done. He will stand in a courtroom, under oath, and correct the record. He will tell the judge that his name is not Saul Goodman. He will ask to be called James McGill. He will give up the brand, give up the mask, give up the phrase, and return to the name he was given at birth. That moment only works because of everything the name Saul Goodman has been doing for the previous 11 years of television. Giving up the name is the point of the entire story. Every scheme, every suit, every commercial, every lie has to pile up until the weight of the alias becomes unbearable, and the man underneath has to come up for air. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The name is not a detail. The name is the blueprint. And to understand why this character works the way he does, to understand why the man underneath ever mattered in the first place, the conversation has to go back further than the law firm, further than the correspondence school diploma, further than the day Saul Goodman was invented in an Albuquerque strip mall. It has to go back to a house in Albuquerque, where a man sits in the dark because he believes electricity is trying to kill him, and where a younger brother shows up with groceries he does not have to bring. Section 2. The Chuck McGill problem. Why the brother nobody liked is the key to everything. Charles Lindbergh McGill Jr., called Chuck by the few people close enough to use a nickname, was born in 1944 in Cicero, Illinois. He is Jimmy's older brother by about 16 years, which matters more than it sounds like it should. When Jimmy was a child, Chuck was already a young adult. When Jimmy was getting into trouble as a teenager, Chuck was already at law school. When Jimmy was running slip and fall scams in Chicago in his 20s, Chuck was already a named partner at one of the most respected law firms in the American Southwest, Hamlin, and McGill, which he had built alongside his friend George Hamlin and George's son, Howard. The age gap meant Chuck never really saw his brother as an equal. He saw him as a child who never quite grew up. That view of Jimmy would define every interaction the two men ever had, and it would eventually shape every bad decision Jimmy ever made. Chuck, on paper, was the family success story. He was the older son who did everything right. He went to a real law school. He built a real firm. He won a famous case early in his career, a precedent-setting matter called State versus Gonzalez, which the show references as proof that Chuck was not just respected, but genuinely gifted. He married a woman named Rebecca Bois, a classical musician who he loved deeply and who eventually left him. He was, by every measurable standard, the McGill brother who made something of himself. Jimmy grew up in the shadow of that reputation. Their parents, particularly the father Jimmy worked alongside in the family corner store, seemed to prefer Jimmy despite everything. Jimmy was the charming son. Jimmy was the one with personality. Chuck was brilliant and respected, but Jimmy was the one people actually liked. Chuck noticed this. Chuck resented this. The show establishes early in the second season of Better Call Saul, through a conversation between Chuck and Howard Hamlin, that Chuck has always known his parents preferred Jimmy, and that Chuck has always privately felt that this preference was undeserved. Jimmy, in Chuck's view, was a thief and a liar, who got away with everything because he was likable. Chuck had to earn every inch of his respect, and Jimmy got his for free just by being in the room. This is the wound the show keeps returning to. Chuck is not jealous of Jimmy in the way television usually shows jealousy. He is not plotting against him in a cartoon sense. Chuck's jealousy is something quieter and more poisonous. It is the jealousy of the older brother who did everything the right way and watched the younger brother get the love anyway. That feeling becomes the core of everything Chuck does across the 5 seasons he appears in. Every time Chuck smiles at Jimmy and says something supportive, there is a second layer underneath that says, "I know what you really are, and you will never be what I am." When we meet Chuck in the first season of Better Call Saul, he is not practicing at his firm. He is hiding inside his own house in Albuquerque. He believes he suffers from a condition called electromagnetic hypersensitivity. He thinks that modern electronics, phones, light bulbs, power lines, all of them give off waves that physically hurt him. So he lives in the dark with no electricity, covering himself in a silver space blanket when he has to deal with anything that might have been near a circuit board. Visitors have to leave their phones and car keys in a mailbox outside his door. He gets his groceries delivered. He reads books by the light of a camping lantern. He looks, to anyone watching, like a man slowly losing his mind. The show is extremely careful about how it handles this. Electromagnetic hypersensitivity is not a recognized medical condition. The show knows this. In the episode Alpine Shepherd Boy, a doctor named Dr. Cruz secretly activates the hospital bed Chuck is lying in, turning on the electronics around him without telling him. Chuck feels nothing. He does not react. Dr. Cruz uses this as proof that the condition is not physical. It is in his head. Later in the series, during a crucial courtroom scene, a hidden cell phone battery is planted in Chuck's pocket, and he carries it for nearly 2 hours without effect. The show is not subtle about this. Chuck's illness is psychosomatic. It is real in the sense that he genuinely feels it, but it is not caused by electricity. It is caused by something else inside him. That something else is the engine of the whole brother relationship. Because Chuck's illness started around the time Jimmy got his law degree. Jimmy, who had been working in the mailroom at Hamlin and McGill, secretly completed his college degree and attended a correspondence law school called the University of American Samoa, while still working at his brother's firm. He passed the bar. He came to Chuck and Howard full of pride, expecting to be hired as an associate at the family firm. And Chuck blocked it, quietly, without telling Jimmy. Chuck went to Howard privately and said that Jimmy was not the kind of lawyer the firm could afford to have. Howard, to spare Chuck's feelings, took the blame publicly, letting Jimmy believe that Howard was the one who had rejected him. Jimmy spent years hating Howard for this. The truth, revealed in the first season finale, Pimento, was that the rejection came from Chuck. This is the key fact of the entire character. Jimmy became a lawyer because he wanted his brother to be proud of him. His brother, privately, refused to let him in. And his brother refused to let him know why. Every bad thing Saul Goodman would eventually do traces back in some way to that single piece of information being hidden from Jimmy for years. The reveal of it, in Pimento, is the first real fracture between the brothers. Jimmy finds out, and his face does something the show will keep returning to. It is not rage. It is a kind of shocked hollowness. The look of a person who just discovered that the foundation underneath them was never there. He had spent his whole adult life believing that his brother was the one person who actually saw him, who had rescued him from Chicago, who had given him the mailroom job out of love. Now he learns that his brother viewed him as a lost cause the entire time. That everything Chuck ever said to him kindly was the language a prison guard uses with a prisoner he has already decided cannot be rehabilitated. What makes this more than just a standard sibling betrayal is how the show handles what Chuck says next. Over the course of the second and third seasons, Chuck begins actively trying to destroy Jimmy's career. Not because Jimmy has done anything wrong yet. Chuck preemptively dismantles him because Chuck believes, deep in his bones, that Jimmy is incapable of being a real lawyer, and that letting Jimmy practice is a betrayal of the law itself. Chuck has one of the most revealing lines in the entire series when he tells Kim Wexler that the law is mankind's greatest achievement, that the rule of law is sacred, and that Jimmy is making a mockery of it by practicing. Chuck believes this. Chuck is not lying when he says it, and that is what makes it devastating. Because Chuck is not wrong about Jimmy's tendencies. He just also is not willing to believe that Jimmy could ever be anything else. The relationship gets pushed past the point of repair in the third season, in an episode called Lantern. Jimmy visits Chuck after a long feud and tries to apologize. He tries to tell his brother that he has regrets, that he wants to do things differently, that he wishes they could find a way back to each other, because there are not that many McGills left in the world. Chuck listens. And then Chuck delivers one of the cruelest speeches in any television show. He tells Jimmy that he does not doubt Jimmy's emotions are real. He just does not care. He tells Jimmy that Jimmy will never change, that he is just going to keep hurting people, that his apologies are meaningless because they do not lead anywhere. And then he says the line that breaks everything. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but the truth is, you've never mattered all that much to me. Michael McKean, who played Chuck for 5 seasons, has said in interviews that Chuck does not actually mean that line. McKean's reading of the moment is that Chuck is exhausted. Chuck is ill. Chuck cannot handle his brother's pain on top of his own. And so Chuck says the single worst thing he can think of. The thing most likely to make Jimmy leave and never come back. It is the verbal equivalent of cutting the rope. Chuck says it because he has decided the relationship is more painful to maintain than to end. He does not mean that Jimmy has never mattered. He means that he cannot afford to keep mattering to Jimmy. But Jimmy does not know that. Jimmy hears the surface of the line. Jimmy believes it. And Jimmy leaves. That night, Chuck commits suicide. The show is deliberately careful about the word. He sets his own house on fire by kicking over the lantern he uses because he will not tolerate electricity. And he does this after a long scene of methodically destroying every electrical device in the house, suggesting his condition has spiraled into something final. The fire department later rules it an accident, and his obituary says the same. But the show makes clear what actually happened. Chuck McGill killed himself by setting his own house on fire. And he did it the same night he told his brother he had never mattered. Jimmy, for the rest of his life, will carry the weight of that final conversation. He will carry it when he invents Saul Goodman a few months later. He will carry it through every interaction with Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. He will carry it in Omaha when he watches his own old commercials alone in his house at night. And the show will finally let him say out loud what he has been carrying when he stands in a courtroom in 2010 and publicly confesses that he pushed his brother to his death. That moment is the hinge of his entire arc. And the reason it lands is because the show has spent 6 seasons building the weight of what Chuck did to Jimmy and what Jimmy did to Chuck, and how neither of them ever figured out how to tell the other one the truth. There is a flashback in the series finale that changes how the whole relationship reads. It is set before all of the damage. Chuck has just started showing the first signs of his condition. Jimmy has dropped off a bag of groceries at Chuck's house, unprompted, without being asked. Chuck, who is usually prickly with Jimmy, tells him he did not have to do this. Chuck is rich. Chuck could have hired someone. Chuck could have asked an intern from his firm to do it. Why, Chuck asks, is Jimmy doing this? Jimmy says, "Because you're my brother, duh." Chuck, for once, does not dismiss him. Chuck actually asks about Jimmy's cases. He sounds interested. He offers Jimmy a line about how there is no shame in going back and changing your path if you do not like where you are headed. Chuck is reading a copy of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. Jimmy brushes him off, annoyed, and leaves. Chuck looks after him and says, almost to himself, that they always end up having the same conversation. That flashback does not appear until the final episode of the series. It is placed there on purpose, because the show wants you to understand that the relationship between these two men was not always this poisoned. That there was a version of it where Chuck was, in his own stunted way, trying. That Chuck could have been the older brother Jimmy needed. And that Jimmy, too wounded by years of condescension, could not recognize the moment when his brother was actually reaching for him. The tragedy of the McGill brothers is not that one was good and one was bad. It is that both of them were capable of more than they ever gave each other, and neither of them ever quite figured out how to ask for it in time. Chuck is the reason Saul Goodman exists. Not because Chuck drove Jimmy to crime in some simple cause and effect way. Because Chuck convinced Jimmy that the name McGill would always be a disappointment. That nothing Jimmy did under that name would ever be enough. The only way out was to invent a name Chuck had no claim to. A name that did not carry any of the family weight. A name that was not about being a McGill at all. Saul Goodman is, in the most literal psychological sense, the name Jimmy chose when he gave up on ever being seen by the one person whose seeing mattered. After Chuck's death, Jimmy does not practice law as himself again. He goes straight to the 4th season finale and tells Kim that he is done being Jimmy. He is Saul now. The older brother is dead. The younger brother has no reason left to carry the family name. There is one more thing Chuck gets right about Jimmy, and this is the hardest part. Chuck tells Jimmy in that final lantern scene that Jimmy is not going to change, that he is just going to keep hurting people. Over the course of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, Jimmy will hurt a lot of people. Some of them directly, some of them by association. Howard Hamlin will die on the floor of his apartment because of a scheme Jimmy ran. Walter White's empire will kill dozens of people, whom Saul Goodman helped to protect and launder for. Chuck will turn out to have been right about the trajectory. The painful question the show keeps asking is whether Chuck being right about Jimmy's future is part of what made that future happen. If your own brother tells you at 25 that you will never be anything but a con man, how many years of your life will you spend proving him right? just because you never figured out how to prove him wrong. Chuck dies at the end of the third season of Better Call Saul. There are still 3 more seasons to go. The show will spend those 3 seasons watching Jimmy McGill become the man his brother always accused him of being, while never quite admitting out loud that the accusation was the thing that drove the becoming. Chuck is not in those 3 seasons, but he is in every frame of them. The absence is doing work. Every time Jimmy puts on a louder suit, every time Saul Goodman tells a bigger lie, every time he runs a scheme that another version of himself would have been too ashamed to run, Chuck's voice is audible under the scene. Always the same, Jimmy. Ever since he was 9, always the same. The younger brother spends the rest of the show trying to prove that line wrong, and succeeding instead at proving it right. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The full horror of what Chuck believed about Jimmy does not land in their private conversations. It does not land in the grocery store flashback, or the final phone call, or the funeral Jimmy is not permitted to grieve at properly. It lands in a public courtroom, in a bar hearing, with an audience of lawyers watching, the moment Chuck McGill finally says out loud what he has been thinking for 40 years. And the younger brother who baited him into saying it realizes he has won a fight that was never worth winning. Section 3. Chicanery. The single episode that proves Saul was never just comic relief. Chicanery is the 5th episode of the 3rd season of Better Call Saul. It first aired on AMC on May 8, 2017. It was written by Gordon Smith and directed by Daniel Sackheim, who was making his first episode of the show. It holds a perfect score on Rotten Tomatoes, with a 100% approval rating based on 14 reviews. It received a 10 out of 10 score from Terry Schwartz at IGN, who described it as the best episode of Better Call Saul to date, a judgment that has been echoed by enough critics across enough outlets over the years that it has become the default critical consensus. Time magazine ranked it 8th on their list of the best television episodes of 2017. The AV Club gave it an A. TV Line named Michael McKean their Performer of the Week for his work in it. The episode is, by nearly every objective measure, one of the most highly regarded hours of television in the entire Breaking Bad universe. None of that is why it matters to the argument about Saul Goodman being the best character on television. What matters is what the episode is actually doing. Because Chicanery is not a big episode in the traditional sense. There are no explosions. There is no cartel violence. Mike Ehrmantraut does not appear. Gus Fring does not appear. The entire hour takes place, for the most part, in one courtroom. 2 lawyers cross-examine 1 witness. That is the whole event. And the show bets everything on it. What chicanery is, structurally, is a bar disciplinary hearing. Jimmy McGill is facing disbarment. The reason he is facing disbarment is that, in the previous season, his brother Chuck caught him on tape confessing to a crime. Jimmy had secretly altered the numbers on a legal document to sabotage Chuck's work for a banking client called Mesa Verde. When Jimmy found out that Chuck had recorded a confession, he broke into Chuck's house and destroyed the tape, not realizing Chuck had a backup. The Bar Association has now brought a formal hearing. If Jimmy loses, he loses his law license. If Jimmy loses, Saul Goodman never exists. That is the stake the episode is built around. But the stake is not really Jimmy's career. The real stake is the relationship between the 2 brothers. And both men know it. Howard Hamlin, who is advising Chuck, privately tells him that he does not have to testify. Howard's own testimony, plus the testimony of the private investigator Chuck hired, will be enough to win the case without Chuck ever taking the stand. Chuck refuses. Chuck insists on testifying personally. Chuck wants Jimmy disbarred, not just punished. He wants his brother stripped of the one thing that ties him to the family profession. That is the mission. Howard sees this and objects quietly. Chuck does not care. The episode opens with a flashback to 2001, years before any of the main action. Chuck is trying to salvage his marriage to Rebecca Bois. He invites her to dinner at his house. Jimmy comes over to help Chuck put on a performance of normalcy, hiding the early symptoms of his electromagnetic hypersensitivity, because Chuck refuses to tell his own wife that anything is wrong with him. The dinner is going fine until Rebecca's cell phone rings. Chuck, panicked, knocks the phone out of her hand. The scene ends with Rebecca leaving, realizing something is wrong but not understanding what. Jimmy urges Chuck to be honest with her. Chuck refuses. Chuck would rather lose his marriage than tell his wife he is sick. This flashback is not decoration. It is the entire key to what the episode is about to do. Because it establishes two things. First, it shows that Jimmy, even as a con man, knows better than to build a relationship on a lie. He tries to tell Chuck that Rebecca deserves the truth. He is right, and Chuck refuses to listen. Second, it shows that Chuck has always known, at some level, that his condition is something he should hide. He does not treat it as a physical illness. He treats it as a shameful secret. A real physical illness would be something you tell your wife about. This is something you protect from her. That is the admission buried inside the flashback, and the show will come back to it later. In the present day, the hearing begins. Kim Wexler, acting as Jimmy's co-counsel, delivers the opening statement. She tells the bar committee that the real story is not Jimmy's alleged crimes. The real story is two brothers whose long-strained relationship has finally broken. That framing is the whole case. Kim is signaling, early and clearly, that she is going to turn the hearing into a competency evaluation of Chuck, rather than a disbarment trial of Jimmy. She is going to put the witness on trial. The committee accommodates Chuck's condition. The lights are turned off. The clocks are taken off the walls. Everyone in the room surrenders their cell phones before Chuck enters. Chuck sits down on the witness stand and, under oath, calmly explains that he has electromagnetic hypersensitivity. He explains what the tape recording showed. He explains that he baited Jimmy into a confession on purpose. He makes a point of saying that he does not hate his brother. He says the rule of law is too important to be toyed with, and that is the only reason he wants Jimmy disbarred. He sounds reasonable. He sounds like a respected attorney doing an unpleasant duty. For about 10 minutes of screen time, he is winning. Then Jimmy starts his cross-examination. And Jimmy has brought two weapons into the room that Chuck does not know about yet. The first weapon is Rebecca. Jimmy has secretly contacted her and told her about Chuck's condition. Rebecca had no idea. She walks into the hearing while Chuck is on the stand. Chuck's face when he sees her is the face of a man whose private shame has just walked into a public room. He is mortified. He requests a recess. He speaks to her privately, briefly, and then he comes back trying to pretend the shock has not rattled him. He makes a small, smug comment to Jimmy, something about how they are not on an episode of Perry Mason, suggesting he is not about to break down and confess anything. He thinks he has survived the ambush. He has not. The second weapon is Huel Babineau. Huel is a minor pickpocket Jimmy knows, a large man with what one character calls a light touch. Fans of Breaking Bad recognize Huel instantly, because Huel will later become Saul's bodyguard in the main series, and will eventually be the man who lifts the poisoned cigarette out of Jesse Pinkman's pocket. In chicanery, Jimmy has hired Huel to do something much simpler. Huel stands near the entrance of the hearing room and, as Chuck walks in, bumps into him in a way that looks completely accidental. In that bump, Huel plants a fully charged cell phone battery into the breast pocket of Chuck's suit. Chuck has been sitting on the witness stand for nearly 2 hours, with a live phone battery directly against his chest, and has felt absolutely nothing. Jimmy does not reveal this immediately. He asks Chuck, politely, to reach into his pocket. Chuck, confused, does. He pulls out the battery. The room is silent. Jimmy calmly explains what has just happened. He explains that the battery has been on Chuck's person for the duration of his testimony. He points out that, according to Chuck's own description of his condition, this level of exposure should have caused Chuck severe physical reactions. No such reaction occurred. Chuck felt nothing, which means that either Chuck's condition is not what he says it is, or Chuck has been wrong about it his entire life. This is the trap closing, and Chuck, under oath, in front of his ex-wife, in front of his own law firm's managing partner, in front of the bar committee, in front of the people whose respect he has built his entire identity on, breaks. What follows is, depending on how you count, somewhere between 30 seconds and a minute of pure, controlled fury, delivered by Michael McKean in a performance that practically every major critic writing at the time singled out as one of the best pieces of acting the show would ever produce. Chuck stops being a witness. Chuck becomes a brother. The rage that has been buried for 40 years finally comes out. And it comes out in front of a court reporter. He screams that he is not crazy. He says he knows Jimmy swapped those numbers on the Mesa Verde documents. He remembers that the correct number was 1216, the year after the Magna Carta, and he could not possibly have forgotten it. He accuses Jimmy of orchestrating the billboard stunt from the first season. He brings up the 1992 sunroof incident, the one where Jimmy defecated into a rival's car without knowing children were inside. He screams that he saved Jimmy from that he took him into his own firm, that he should have stopped him years ago. He screams that Jimmy has never changed and never will. He screams that ever since Jimmy was 9 years old, he was stealing from their parents' cash drawer, and that Jimmy getting to be a lawyer is a sick joke. He screams that Jimmy is a bad person. He screams all of this in a courtroom, into a microphone, on the record. And then he stops. He looks around. He realizes where he is. He realizes what he has just said, and to whom. The room is frozen. Kim is not smiling. Howard looks sick. The bar committee members are staring at him the way people stare at a stranger who has just said something they cannot unhear. Rebecca is watching her ex-husband with something close to grief. Chuck tries to sit back down. He tries to apologize. He stammers. It is too late. Jimmy stands up. Jimmy looks at his brother, and Jimmy quietly says he has no further questions. The final detail of the scene is the exit signs. The hearing room has been built, at Chuck's request, as a dark environment. No overhead lights. But there are 2 red exit signs, one on each side of the room, because those are required by law. Throughout the earlier testimony, those signs had been almost silent. As Chuck sinks back into his chair in the aftermath of his breakdown, the show brings up the sound of those signs on the soundtrack. A low, constant electric hum. The kind of hum Chuck has always claimed to be able to hear. The signs have been buzzing the whole time. Only now, after he has destroyed himself in public, does Chuck finally notice them. There are a number of things about that scene worth understanding. The first is that the final moments of the cross-examination, with the 3 bar committee members watching a man unravel in front of them, are a direct visual homage to the climactic courtroom scene in The Caine Mutiny, a 1954 film in which a rigid, by-the-book Navy captain destroys his own credibility by cracking under cross-examination. Vince Gilligan has named The Caine Mutiny as one of his personal favorite films, and it has been referenced elsewhere in the Breaking Bad universe. Uproxx noted at the time that even the facial expressions of the 3 committee members in Chicanery match the reactions of the 3 judges in the Caine film. The show is telling you, visually, what it is doing. It is restaging a classic courtroom collapse. The second thing to understand is how Jimmy looks during all of it. He is not celebrating. He wins the case. Jimmy will avoid disbarment on the basis of what just happened. His career is safe. But the camera keeps returning to his face during Chuck's meltdown. And his face is not the face of a man who has won. Bob Odenkirk plays it with a small, tight, awful expression. The expression of a man who has just done the cruelest thing he has ever done in his life, to the only brother he has, in front of a room of strangers, and who knows it. The show is deliberately denying the audience the satisfaction of a clean victory. Jimmy has survived, yes, but at a cost that is written all over his face. The third thing is what Kim Wexler sees. Kim has been Jimmy's partner throughout the hearing. She helped build the strategy. She cross-examined the other witnesses, but she did not know about Huel. She did not know about the phone battery. That piece of the plan, Jimmy executed alone. Kim watches what happens, and for the first time in the series, you can see her registering something in Jimmy that she had not fully seen before. She is looking at the man she loves, and she is realizing he is capable of an act of public cruelty that she would never have agreed to if she had known. That look on Kim's face during Chuck's breakdown is one of the most important looks in the entire show. It is the first crack in her faith in him, and every crack that comes later will be shaped by the crack in this one. The fourth thing, and maybe the most important, is what the episode proves about the show itself. Chicanery is an episode in which nothing physically violent happens. It is an episode in which the climax is a man on a witness stand being emotionally dismantled by his own sibling. It is an episode about 2 brothers destroying each other with paperwork and a pocketed battery. And critics across the industry responded to it as one of the great hours of television of its year. The consensus reading on Rotten Tomatoes calls it heartbreaking, sober, and defining, and says it cements Better Call Saul as essential television. That sentence is doing something worth noticing. It is saying that the moment Better Call Saul became undeniably important as a drama was the moment it proved it could generate maximum emotional weight with minimum spectacle. No guns, no chases, no drugs. Just a legal hearing and a lifetime of brotherly damage. For Saul Goodman as a character, chicanery is the point of no return. Jimmy wins the hearing. Jimmy keeps his law license. But the victory breaks Chuck in a way that will lead, within the same season, to Chuck's relapse, his forced buyout from the firm, and his suicide. Jimmy will never recover from knowing what he did in that courtroom, and the evidence that he never recovers is everything Saul Goodman will eventually become. You can draw a straight line from the expression on Jimmy's face during Chuck's meltdown to the louder suits he starts wearing afterward, to the louder schemes he starts running, to the louder persona he invents to drown out the memory. Saul Goodman, in a very real sense, is the noise Jimmy McGill starts making to keep himself from hearing the sound of his brother screaming in a courtroom. The episode also reframes how you watch every earlier Saul appearance. Once you have seen chicanery, the Saul Goodman of Breaking Bad stops being comic relief forever. You cannot watch him crack jokes in his strip mall office the same way. You know that somewhere behind the inflatable Statue of Liberty outside his building, there is a man who won a legal hearing by publicly dismantling his own brother. That man has been telling jokes for 4 seasons of Breaking Bad, and you laughed at them. And now you know what he was laughing to keep from remembering. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The performance in that courtroom was, in a way, the last honest thing Jimmy McGill would do for years. After Chuck, the scheme stopped being partly for righteousness and start being only for himself. After Chuck, the line between Jimmy and Saul stops being one Jimmy can walk back across. After Chuck, the only person left who still seemed to see the real man underneath the growing performance was a woman with neat handwriting and a pair of cheap earrings she had been wearing since she was a child. Section 4. Kim Wexler is not his love interest. She is his evidence. Kim Wexler does not appear in Breaking Bad. Not once. Not in a photograph on a desk. Not in a throwaway mention in a phone call. Not even in a glance at an old picture hidden in a shoebox. For the 6 years that Saul Goodman is on screen alongside Walter White and Jesse Pinkman, the most important person in his life is never once named, never once referenced, never once hinted at. Saul talks about his ex-wives. He talks about his assistant, Francesca. He talks about his brother, once, in passing. Kim does not exist in that show. She does not exist in El Camino. She does not exist anywhere in the Breaking Bad universe except inside Better Call Saul itself. That absence is the single most important piece of information about who Saul Goodman actually is. And almost no one watching Breaking Bad in real time noticed it, because it was hidden by something that had not been written yet. Kim Wexler was created by Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould for the pilot of Better Call Saul in 2015. The writers, in interviews, have been open about the fact that they did not have a long-term plan for her when they started. She was going to be, in Gilligan's own words, either a former love interest or a future love interest for Jimmy, and possibly someone who would fade out of his life as the show moved toward the Saul Goodman era. That is not what happened. Over the course of 6 seasons, Kim became the co-lead of the show. Ray Seahorn's performance earned her 2 Primetime Emmy nominations for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Drama Series, and the years she was not nominated were widely considered one of the most noted snubs in recent Emmy history. By the time the show ended, nearly every major critic writing about it was naming Kim as one of the best-written, best-performed female characters in the history of cable drama. Her backstory is filled in slowly, across the 6 seasons, in small and deliberate pieces. Kim grew up in Nebraska. Her mother was an alcoholic who showed up to pick her up from school drunk. The show gives us one specific flashback, where Kim, as a child, stands in the cold waiting for her mother, realizes her mother is too drunk to drive, and decides to walk home alone in the snow. Her mother screams at her and drives off. A second flashback shows Kim, slightly older, caught by a department store manager for shoplifting a pair of earrings. Her mother comes in, sweet-talks the manager into letting Kim go, and then hands the earrings back to Kim in the parking lot afterward, revealing that she had stolen them herself while the manager was distracted. Kim keeps those earrings. She wears them off and on for the rest of her life. They appear again and again in the series, small silver studs that Kim is wearing in scenes set decades after the theft. The show is telling you that Kim has always known, at some level, that she came from a family of people who took what they wanted and explained it to themselves afterward. She spent her whole adult life trying to outrun that fact. And one of the things that drew her to Jimmy McGill was that part of her never wanted to outrun it at all. Kim and Jimmy met in the mailroom at Hamlin and McGill. She was working there to pay for law school, which the firm was partly financing for her. He was working there because his brother Chuck had made it a condition of his moving to Albuquerque. The two of them became friends first, long before either of them became lawyers. They shared cigarettes in the parking garage. They covered for each other. She watched him study for the bar exam in secret, not believing his brother would ever accept him at the firm. When Jimmy passed the bar, Kim was one of the only people at HHM who celebrated. When the firm refused to hire him as an associate, Kim was the one who encouraged him to start his own practice. What makes Kim different from almost every other partner character in prestige television is that she is not a moral check on the main character in any simple way. She is not the worried wife. She is not the good influence. She is something much more complicated than that. Kim has her own darkness. She is very good at it. Over the course of Better Call Saul, Kim goes from being a by-the-book corporate lawyer to being a willing partner in Jimmy's schemes. She participates in bar scams in the second season, where she and Jimmy pose as a brother and sister named Giselle and Victor, and con a stranger out of several $100s for an expensive bottle of tequila, seemingly just for the thrill of it. She participates in the Mesa Verde blueprint switch, which is a direct professional crime. She helps Jimmy construct the con that saves Huel Babineau from prison. By the sixth season, she is an active co-designer of the plan to publicly destroy Howard Hamlin. Ray Seahorn has said in interviews that one of the things she worked on with the writers was making sure Kim was never simply an innocent being corrupted. Kim chose these things. Kim wanted them. The show plants this from the beginning by showing again and again that Kim gets a specific kind of light in her eyes when a con is in progress. She is not being dragged along. She is often the one steering. When Jimmy and Kim sit together after pulling off a scam, the camera lingers on her face, and her face is sometimes more pleased than his is. This is what makes Kim the evidence rather than the love interest. Because if Saul Goodman were just a bad person in a bad suit, the presence of a good woman in his life could be explained away as a mistake, or as proof of some hidden good. Kim is not a good woman accidentally involved with a bad man. Kim is a highly intelligent, highly disciplined, highly accomplished lawyer who chose this man, clearly, repeatedly, and in full awareness of what he was. The fact that Kim Wexler loved Jimmy McGill is the strongest argument the show ever makes that there was something in Jimmy worth loving. You cannot write Kim off. She is not fooled. She is not weak. She is not desperate. She is one of the most competent people in the show, and she kept choosing him even when she knew exactly what he was capable of. Which is why the moment she stops choosing him is the moment everything collapses. That moment comes in the sixth season, in an episode called Fun and Games, immediately after Howard Hamlin is killed. Lalo Salamanca has just murdered Howard in Jimmy and Kim's apartment, has forced Jimmy and Kim to help him cover it up, and has been killed shortly after in a separate confrontation. Jimmy and Kim are, in a legal sense, in the clear. The body has been disposed of. The story about Howard's death has been quietly constructed. Outwardly, their life can continue. They go to work. They sit through meetings. They come home. And then, in a scene with almost no music, Kim tells Jimmy she is leaving. She tells him that she cannot keep doing this, that the two of them together are poison, that Howard is dead because of what she and Jimmy did to him, and that Lalo being the one to pull the trigger does not erase their responsibility. She tells him that they were having too much fun destroying Howard's life, that she knows it now, and that the only way to stop is for her to leave. She files for divorce. She walks out of their apartment carrying a single bag. The scene is shot in long, quiet takes. Jimmy pleads with her. Jimmy tells her that Lalo was the one who killed Howard, not them. Kim does not argue. she just leaves. The next scene, without any transition, is Saul Goodman. Full Saul. The loud suit, the inflatable Statue of Liberty, the late-night commercials, the Breaking Bad office. The character the audience knew for years as a comic presence in someone else's story. The show is making the point directly, without subtext, without subtlety. The Saul Goodman era starts the day Kim Wexler leaves. Not a day before, not a day after. The moment Kim is gone, Saul arrives in full, and the show does not even bother dissolving between the two scenes. It just cuts. This is the evidence. Kim is not metaphorically Jimmy's better nature. She is literally the only person whose presence prevented Saul Goodman from fully existing. As long as she was in the apartment, Jimmy was still in the apartment. The second she walked out, Jimmy walked out with her. And what was left was a man in a colorful suit with no brakes and no one left to impress. Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad is not a man who became bad. He is a man who lost the only witness to his goodness and then decided that goodness did not need to exist anymore. Kim also explains the absence in Breaking Bad itself. The reason she is never mentioned in the main show, never photographed, never referenced, is because by the time Walter White walks into Saul's strip mall office, Kim has already been gone for years. Saul has put her so far behind him that she is not allowed into the life he is now living. He does not keep a picture of her. He does not talk about her to Francesca. He does not slip her name when he is drunk. The complete erasure of her from the Breaking Bad timeline is Saul protecting himself from her. If he mentioned her even once, the character he is performing would crack. So he says nothing. For 6 years. To everyone. The show brings her back at the very end. In the finale, after Jimmy has been caught in Omaha and extradited back to Albuquerque, Kim is notified by prosecutors that his testimony could affect her. She flies to the sentencing. She sits in the back row of the courtroom. Jimmy sees her there and, in that moment, starts to do something he has not done in years. He starts to tell the truth. His decision to throw away a 7-year plea deal and confess to everything is a decision made in front of her. He is speaking to the room legally, but he is performing for exactly one person in it. She is the reason he does it. Not because he expects to get her back. He knows he will not. She already has a new life, a new city, a new job, a new relationship. The confession is not a bid for her. It is a gift to her. It is the only honest thing he can still give her. The last scene of the show is Kim visiting him in a federal prison in Colorado. She uses her old New Mexico bar card, which does not have an expiration date, to get in as his attorney. They share a cigarette in a visitation room, leaning against a wall, the way they used to in the HHM parking garage when they were still two nobodies working in a mailroom. Almost nothing is said as she walks away across the prison yard. He raises his fingers toward her in the shape of a gun. She looks back at him once, and then she is gone. That is the last thing Jimmy McGill sees before he disappears into an 86-year sentence. A cigarette, a parking garage, a woman walking away. Kim Wexler is the proof that Jimmy McGill was a real person underneath everything. Kim Wexler is the reason you cannot write off Saul Goodman as just a clown in a bad suit. Kim Wexler is the character Breaking Bad was missing the whole time, sitting invisibly behind every scene Saul appeared in, unaccounted for, unnamed, unremembered, and yet somehow responsible for the fact that the man on screen was as broken as he was. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. which raises a question that has haunted both shows since the moment Better Call Saul started airing. If this is the man who lost to Kim, what does his story look like next to the man who lost nothing because he never had anyone like her to lose in the first place? Section 5. The Walter White Contrast. Why Saul's arc is the more tragic one. Vince Gilligan famously pitched Breaking Bad to network executives with a single sentence. He said he wanted to turn Mr. Chips into Scarface. Mr. Chips is the main character of an old novel and film about a kind, gentle schoolteacher. Scarface is Tony Montana, the violent drug lord from the 1983 Brian De Palma film. Gilligan was telling the executives in one line that the show was going to be a transformation story. A good man was going to become a monster, and the audience was going to watch every step of it. That pitch became the entire shape of Breaking Bad. Walter White starts as a high school chemistry teacher with terminal cancer. He ends 5 seasons later as a meth kingpin in a black hat named Heisenberg, responsible for hundreds of deaths, dying, smiling on the floor of a meth lab while the Badfinger song Baby Blue plays on the soundtrack. Better Call Saul was pitched differently. Gilligan and Peter Gould have said in several interviews that they first considered making it a half-hour comedy, in which Saul Goodman handled a different, colorful client every week. They abandoned that idea. They chose instead to do the exact opposite of the Breaking Bad pitch. Where Breaking Bad was Mr. Chips to Scarface, Better Call Saul was something harder to describe in a single line. It was the story of a man who had a chance to be better than he turned out to be, and who threw it away in small pieces over the course of several years, mostly without noticing he was doing it. The difference between those two pitches is the difference between the two shows, and the difference between the two men. Walter White and Saul Goodman are often grouped together as anti-heroes of the same universe, two sides of one coin, both criminals, both liars, both destroyed by the choices they made. That grouping flattens what is actually very different about them. Walter White is driven at the core by ego. The show makes this explicit. In the 5th season's opening run, Walter says the line, "I am in the empire business." In the final episode of Breaking Bad, in a conversation with his wife Skyler, Walter finally admits the truth about why he did everything he did. He says, "I did it for me." He says he liked it. He says he was good at it. He says he was alive. Those 3 sentences are the entire Walter White character stripped to the bone. He was not cooking meth to provide for his family. He was cooking meth because being Heisenberg made him feel like the man he had always believed he should have been, and was never allowed to be. Walter's tragedy is a classical one. A man with a hidden flaw, in his case pride, is given an opportunity that lets the flaw grow unchecked, and the flaw destroys him and everything he loves. His son rejects him. His brother-in-law is murdered partly because of him. His wife ends up trapped in a house surrounded by DEA investigators. His infant daughter cannot be held by him. He dies alone. The moral math of his story is the math of ancient Greek drama. He reached too far, and he was struck down. Saul Goodman's story does not work that way. Saul Goodman does not die. Saul Goodman does not get struck down in a hail of bullets. Saul Goodman does not reach for an empire. Jimmy McGill, the man underneath him, does not have Walter White's ego. Jimmy does not want to be a kingpin. Jimmy does not want respect from a cartel. Jimmy wants, throughout the entire 6-season run of Better Call Saul, things that are almost small by comparison. He wants his brother to think he is a real lawyer. He wants to be hired at a respectable firm. He wants his own office. He wants to make enough money to take Kim out to a nice dinner. He wants to stop being treated like the family embarrassment. He wants, above all, to be seen. That is a completely different engine than the one driving Walter White. Walter reaches because he has an appetite that has been starved for decades and has finally been fed. Jimmy reaches because he has been told his entire life that he is not worth reaching toward. Walter's problem is that he wanted more than he was allowed to want. Jimmy's problem is that he never believed he was allowed to want anything at all. And so he took what he could get by the only methods he had ever trusted, which were the methods of a con man. The way the two men fall is also different. And the difference is most of what makes Saul's arc the sadder of the two. Walter White falls fast. Within the first 2 seasons of Breaking Bad, he has killed 2 men, watched a young woman die without saving her, and started lying to almost everyone in his life. The show is structured as a constant escalation. Every episode is a step further down. By the final season, Walter is so completely lost to his family that his own young son is trying to call the police on him. The speed of his descent is part of what makes Breaking Bad feel the way it does. The show moves like a car with the brakes cut, faster and faster until it hits a wall. Better Call Saul is almost the physical opposite of that show in terms of pace. It is slow. It lingers. It spends whole episodes on the tiny mechanics of a single scam. It will hold on Jimmy's face for 20 or 30 seconds without cutting. Entire storylines unfold over the course of seasons without obvious forward motion. Viewers who came to it expecting Breaking Bad energy often complained, especially early on, that nothing was happening. Something was happening. It was just happening in inches. Jimmy's slide into becoming Saul Goodman takes 6 full seasons, and almost none of the individual steps look like the decisive one. He gets suspended from practicing law for a year. He starts selling prepaid cell phones under the Saul name on the side. He agrees to take a meeting with someone he should not have met. He lets Kim Wexler pull off one small scam with him, then another. He takes a cartel client. He takes another cartel client. He starts wearing louder suits. He files a lawsuit under a stage name. By the time he is standing in Breaking Bad with Walter White sitting across from him, there is no single moment you can point to as the fall. There were 1,000 moments, and none of them on their own seem to matter. That is what makes Jimmy's story the more crushing one. Walter's fall is a story. It has a beginning and a middle and an end. You can write down the step where he first becomes unsalvageable. Jimmy's fall does not have that step. Every moment the show seems to offer one, the next scene undercuts it. When Chuck dies, you think, that is it. That is the break. Then Kim is still there. When Kim is still there, you think, maybe he can still recover. Then Lalo shows up. When Lalo shows up, you think, now it ends. It does not. Jimmy keeps going. Over and over, the story refuses to let him hit a definitive floor. He just keeps sinking by tiny amounts, and because the amounts are tiny, you keep hoping the next one will not matter either. None of them matter on their own. All of them matter together. There is something else. Walter White has nothing to lose at the start of Breaking Bad. That is the whole premise. He has cancer. He is 50. He is working at a car wash for extra money on top of his teaching salary. His son has cerebral palsy. His unborn daughter will be fatherless soon. He has no career, no respect, no legacy. The show gives him one clear motivation to start cooking meth, which is to leave money for his family before he dies. He then abandons that motivation almost immediately. Breaking Bad is about a man who was offered a reason to fall and took it. Jimmy McGill has something to lose. That is what makes him different. He has Chuck, even when Chuck is cruel to him. He has Kim, who actually loves him, which Walter never really had with Skyler in the same simple way. He has a law practice, however small. He has a life that, at any point during Better Call Saul, he could have held on to if he had been able to make different small choices. The show keeps showing him the exits. Chuck, in his better moments, offers one. Kim, nearly every episode, offers one. Howard Hamlin, awkwardly but sincerely, offers one. Mike Ehrmantraut warns him, in the desert after they nearly die together, that the road they are on leads nowhere good. Jimmy hears all of these warnings. He ignores all of them. That is the sadder story. A man who had nothing and grabbed for it is a tragedy. A man who had something and let it slip through his fingers one piece at a time is a different kind of tragedy. And it is the harder one to watch, because every single episode you are watching him almost get free, and then not quite. The two endings also tell you everything. Walter White dies. He dies on his own terms, having killed the people who stole his money, having saved Jesse Pinkman, having looked his wife in the eye and admitted the truth. The show gives him what could almost be called a heroic death. He is shot by a stray bullet from a machine gun he built himself, which is a deeply ironic image. But he walks around a meth lab one last time, touches the equipment, smiles, and dies. The camera pulls up and away. Baby Blue plays. Whatever you think of Walter White, Breaking Bad sends him out with dignity. Saul Goodman does not die. Saul Goodman is caught hiding in a dumpster behind a house in Omaha, Nebraska. He is fumbling with a broken phone. The police find him. He is extradited to New Mexico in the back of a van. He is sentenced to 86 years in a federal prison in Colorado. He will, in all likelihood, die there. The last shots of the show are of him in a prison yard, in a tan jumpsuit, watching a woman he used to be married to walk away from him forever. There is no Baby Blue. There is no meth lab. There is no triumphant music cue. There is just a prison gate and the sound of Kim Wexler's footsteps. Walter White got to be Heisenberg one last time. Saul Goodman never got to be Saul Goodman again after he confessed in court. The loud suits are in storage. The billboards are gone. The inflatable Statue of Liberty is in a landfill somewhere. What is left is a 60-something-year-old man in a federal prison who answers to the name Jimmy McGill and will keep answering to it for the rest of his life. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. None of that, none of the comparison, none of the contrast would work if Bob Odenkirk had failed to hold the character together across 14 years of screen time and two completely different shows. Which is the part of the story almost nobody was expecting when the Mr. Show sketch comedian with no real dramatic credits got cast in what was supposed to be a 3-episode guest spot. Section 6. Bob Odenkirk's performance. The comedy writer who outacted everyone. Bob Odenkirk was born on October 22, 1962, in Berwyn, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. For the first 20 years of his career, he was known in the entertainment industry as a comedy writer. He wrote for Saturday Night Live from 1987 to 1991. He won an Emmy for his work on The Ben Stiller Show in 1993. He wrote for Late Night with Conan O'Brien. He had a small recurring role on The Larry Sanders Show. He co-created a sketch comedy series on HBO called Mr. Show with Bob and David, alongside David Cross, which ran from 1995 to 1998 and is still considered by comedy fans to be one of the most influential sketch shows of its era. He did bit parts on Everybody Loves Raymond, Curb Your Enthusiasm, How I Met Your Mother, Weeds, and Arrested Development. He directed 3 small films, none of which were widely seen. He was, by every measurable standard in the industry, a comedy guy, a writer's room guy, a guy you hired when you needed someone who could do a lot of characters in a short amount of time. He had never carried a dramatic role in his life when the phone call came for Breaking Bad. Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould have said in multiple interviews that they did not audition Odenkirk for the part of Saul Goodman. They offered it to him. The writing staff at Breaking Bad were fans of Mr. Show. Gould's wife Nora was a fan. Clips from Mr. Show were played in the writer's room. When Gould came up with the idea for a loud, fast-talking criminal defense lawyer who would help Walter White and Jesse Pinkman, Odenkirk's name came up almost immediately. Gould has described the thinking plainly. He said Saul was going to be a fast-talking, chameleon-like character, and Odenkirk had a huge catalog of characters he had played on Mr. Show. He could do voices. He could do rhythms. He could do the specific kind of verbal runs that Gould wanted Saul to deliver. The offer was for 4 episodes. Odenkirk was to appear, do a few scenes, and be written out. That was the plan. What happened instead is that Gilligan and Gould watched Odenkirk work on set and realized they had something they had not expected. Odenkirk has said himself, in interviews with Backstage and other publications, that the first script he got was Season 2, Episode 8 of Breaking Bad, which introduced Saul Goodman. He said his first instinct was to rewrite his own lines, because he was, at heart, still a writer, and he was not used to trusting someone else's words without picking at them. He eventually did not rewrite them. He just delivered them. The scene in the RV, with Walter and Jesse in ski masks kidnapping him in the desert, was where Saul Goodman first walked fully into the Breaking Bad universe. The character was supposed to be a brief diversion. He became a permanent part of the show within a handful of episodes. By the end of Breaking Bad's run, Odenkirk had appeared in 43 episodes. When the spin-off was announced, it was around him. Better Call Saul premiered on AMC on February 8, 2015. Its pilot set a record at the time for the highest-rated scripted series premiere in basic cable history. For the next 7 years, on Better Call Saul, Odenkirk delivered what is, in the opinion of a very large portion of the television critical community, one of the most under-recognized, sustained lead performances in modern television. He received 6 nominations for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series. He did not win any of them. That record, 6 nominations without a win in the Outstanding Lead Actor category, ties the all-time record for most nominations in that category without ever winning. He received 5 nominations for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actor in a Drama Series. He received 5 nominations for the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Male Actor in a Drama Series. He received 6 nominations for the Critics' Choice Television Award for Best Actor in a Drama Series, and he won 3 of those, which is the one area where the awards voters actually gave him what many believed he was owed. The performance itself is worth breaking down in more detail, because it is doing something most lead actors in drama are not asked to do. Most actors on a prestige drama play one version of their character at a time. They may have slightly different registers for different scenes. They may be quieter in a hospital than they are in a bar, but they are fundamentally playing one person. Odenkirk is almost never playing one person. He is almost always playing at least 2 at once, and sometimes 3. He is playing Jimmy McGill, the real man underneath, and simultaneously, he is playing whichever performance Jimmy is currently giving to the person in the room with him. In the 2nd season of Better Call Saul, there is a scene in which Jimmy meets a potential client at a retirement community. He is selling himself as a reassuring, grandfatherly lawyer for elder care issues. Watch Odenkirk's face in that scene. He is running 2 performances at once. There is the warm, reassuring voice he is using with the elderly clients. And, in tiny moments when the clients are not looking, there is the other face, The frustrated salesman face. The face of a man who is running a script and resenting the fact that he has to run it. The two faces coexist in the same scene, sometimes in consecutive shots. That is a technical acting feat most dramatic actors never attempt, because it is genuinely hard to do without looking like you are doing it. In the third season episode, Expenses, Odenkirk delivers what a lot of actors and critics have pointed to as one of his single best pieces of work. Jimmy, who has been suspended from practicing law for a year, walks into the office of his malpractice insurance provider. He is there to try to get a refund on his premium. When he is denied, he stages a fake emotional breakdown right there at the desk. He cries. He stammers. He reveals, as if by accident, personal information about his brother Chuck's mental illness, knowing that the insurance agent will report it and cause Chuck's own premiums to skyrocket. It is an act of revenge disguised as a nervous collapse. What Odenkirk does in that scene is play a man faking tears, while also playing a man who, underneath the fake tears, is having some real feelings he does not want to admit to. The fake breakdown is a performance, but some of the pain leaking through it is not fake. The audience is asked to watch two layers simultaneously and track which one is real. Most scripts do not ask that of an actor. Better Call Saul asks that of Odenkirk almost every episode. In the series finale, Saul Gone, Odenkirk has to play the shift in real time. In the courtroom scene, Jimmy begins by performing Saul Goodman one more time. He is selling the judge a story about how he was a victim of Walter White, kidnapped, forced against his will, terrified for his life. He is using every trick the character has. Then, as he looks at Kim Wexler, sitting in the back of the courtroom, something changes. The voice softens. The rhythm slows. The theatrical hand gestures stop. Without any special effect, without any obvious cut, Odenkirk stops being Saul and becomes Jimmy. The audience watches a character peel off a mask he has been wearing for a decade, live, in a single unbroken scene. Critics at Variety and elsewhere specifically singled out that moment as the clearest technical showcase of what Odenkirk had quietly been doing for years. There is a detail about the making of the final season that is worth noting, because it changes how the finished product lands. On July 27, 2021, during the production of an episode that would have aired later in the 6th season, Odenkirk collapsed on set. He was 60 years old. He had suffered a heart attack. He was airlifted to a hospital. Production on the show halted for weeks. There was genuine concern in the industry and among fans that Odenkirk might not recover in time to finish the series, or might not recover at all. He did recover. He came back to work. He finished the show. The scenes that were filmed after his heart attack, including some of the most emotionally devastating material of the entire run, were shot by a man who had, weeks earlier, nearly died at his own job. That knowledge is not in the performance exactly, but it is sitting underneath it, and many viewers find it impossible to separate the two. Odenkirk has talked in interviews about what the role cost him. He has said, in a comment that went around widely, that playing Saul Goodman finally helped him understand why actors like Bryan Cranston, who played Walter White, or James Gandolfini, who played Tony Soprano, always seemed miserable in interviews during the runs of their shows. He said he had not previously believed that living inside a dark character for years would actually weigh on you. After doing it for a decade, he said he understood. That level of honesty from an actor about the toll of the work is not common, and it tells you something about what Odenkirk brought to the job. He was not just performing Saul, he was carrying him. For 14 years, across 43 episodes of one show and 63 of another. Over 100 hours of television, one man holding a single character together through a massive stylistic shift, a network transition, a worldwide pandemic, and a medical emergency that nearly killed him. What he delivered across all of that is a portrait of a human being that is almost impossible to dismiss. When you watch Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad now, after having seen Better Call Saul, you see a different actor in the role. You see the performance of Saul Goodman on top of the ghost of Jimmy McGill. You hear the small beats where something cracks. You notice the times when the jokes go on a little too long, like the character is using them as noise to drown something out. None of that is different from how the scenes were shot in 2009. All of it is different because of what Odenkirk did in the 15 years afterward. He retroactively deepened a character who had already finished airing. That is a rare thing in television. Most performances do not get a second act that rewrites the first one. Odenkirk himself, in most interviews about the show, is unfailingly modest about his own work. He gives credit to Gilligan, to Gould, to the writers, to Ray Seahorn, to Jonathan Banks, to everyone in the room. He tends to describe himself as a workaday actor who happened to get lucky with a great script. Some critics have pointed to this modesty as part of why he never quite got the awards attention a Cranston or a Gandolfini would have gotten for equivalent work. He simply does not campaign the way other actors campaign. He does not tell you he is doing something difficult. He just does it, over and over, for 14 years, and lets the work speak. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The work speaks loudest, maybe, in the scenes where the man underneath Saul Goodman is the one doing the speaking. Because every time Odenkirk lets Jimmy McGill peek out from behind the performance, you are reminded that the performance was always covering something. And what it was covering was not a new invention. It was a small-time Illinois con artist named Slippin' Jimmy, who had been riding in the back seat the whole time. Section 7. Slippin' Jimmy, the con artist who never actually disappeared. There is a version of this character that almost nobody talks about, even though he is in the title of an entire animated spin-off series. Slippin' Jimmy. The nickname Jimmy McGill earned on the streets of Cicero, Illinois, before he ever thought about law school, before he met Kim Wexler, before he moved to Albuquerque, before the name Saul Goodman existed as anything more than a mumble in his head. Slippin' Jimmy is the original version. He is the base layer. Every other identity the character ever wears is built on top of him. And the point Better Call Saul keeps quietly making across 6 seasons is that Slippin' Jimmy never actually went away. He just changed clothes. The nickname comes from a specific scam. Jimmy would stage fake slip and fall accidents on icy sidewalks or wet floors in businesses, pretending to have injured himself, and then extract settlement money from the property owners or their insurance providers. He was apparently very good at it. Good enough that the name stuck. Good enough that his friend Marco Pasternak, his partner in crime for most of his young adult life in Chicago, used it as a term of affection and a professional title at the same time. Slippin' Jimmy was not just a nickname. It was a reputation. Within a certain kind of small-time criminal world in the Chicago suburbs, Slippin' Jimmy meant something. The show establishes his origins carefully. Jimmy was the younger son of Ruth and Charles McGill Sr., who ran a corner store in Cicero. His father was, by every account the show gives us, a trusting and gentle man. The kind of man who believed the people who came into his store. The kind of man who was, to put it plainly, a mark. Jimmy, as a child, watched strangers come into the store and take advantage of his father's kindness over and over. They would ask to borrow money. They would ask for food on credit. They would spin sob stories, and the father would believe them, and the store would lose a little more money, and nothing would be done. Jimmy saw this as a child. He absorbed a lesson from it that he would never fully unlearn. The lesson was that honest people in this world are food for dishonest ones, and that the choice in front of you is whether to be the meal or the diner. He chose. Around the time he was 9 years old, according to Chuck's angry monologue in the chicanery courtroom scene, Jimmy started stealing small amounts of cash from his own father's register. Chuck yells this in open court, in front of a room of lawyers, because Chuck believes it is the most damning fact about his brother. He believes it proves that Jimmy is born bad. What Chuck misses, and what the show is quietly careful to show you, is that Jimmy started stealing from the register because he had decided his father was going to be cheated no matter what. So it might as well be by family. That is not the reasoning of a monster. It is the reasoning of a child who watched too much and concluded too early. Slip and Jimmy grew out of that. The scams got bigger. The slip and falls paid out. He ran a fake Rolex scam with Marco, which the show later dramatizes in flashback. Marco would pretend to have passed out drunk in an alley. Jimmy would stumble onto the scene with a stranger and pretend to discover an expensive watch falling out of Marco's pocket. He and Marco would split the money after Jimmy convinced the stranger to give him cash for the watch, which was, of course, worthless. It is a small scam. It is also, if you look at it closely, a two-man show. It requires trust, timing, and a specific kind of quiet partnership. Jimmy and Marco had it. The Chicago life ended with one specific incident in 1992. The show has returned to this moment several times, sometimes for dark comedy, and sometimes for something closer to horror. Jimmy, angry at a man he had a personal grudge against, climbed onto the roof of the man's car and defecated through the open sunroof. He did this in public. What he did not know, and what he only discovered afterward, was that the man's two small children were in the back seat of the car. The act was intended as a prank against an adult. It became, without warning, something much uglier. The man wanted Jimmy charged with criminal offenses that would have resulted in serious prison time. Jimmy's only way out of it was Chuck. That moment is the bridge between Slip and Jimmy and everything that comes after. Because Chuck, already a practicing attorney, agreed to represent Jimmy and get the charges reduced, but only on two conditions. Jimmy had to leave Chicago, and Jimmy had to give up the con artist life and take an honest job. Chuck brought him to Albuquerque. Chuck got him the mailroom position at Hamlin, and McGill. Jimmy, in theory, became a new person. In practice, he never did. The show makes this clear through a dozen small moments across 6 seasons. Jimmy keeps the instincts. He keeps the reflexes. He keeps the specific way of seeing the world that Slip and Jimmy taught him, which was that every situation contains a weakness, and every person contains a lever. And if you know where the weakness is and what the lever is, you can move almost anything. That is not a thought pattern a person can turn off. Jimmy tried for a few years. He went to a correspondence law school. He studied. He passed the bar. He tried to play by the rules. Then the rules turned on him. His brother blocked him from a job at the family firm. He was forced to build his practice from a back room in a nail salon. He was stiffed on a major settlement by his brother's scheming. He was told by his own blood that he would never matter. At every one of these points, the honest path became harder, and the Slip and Jimmy path became easier. It is not surprising that he slid. What is surprising, watching it, is how much of the Slippin' Jimmy identity was already inside him, waiting. He never had to relearn it. It had been there the whole time. Some of the Slippin' Jimmy survival in the character is structural. The Mesa Verde blueprint swap in the second season of Better Call Saul is a Slippin' Jimmy scam, just wearing a suit. Jimmy does not hack into anything. He does not cut power to a building. He swaps a few numbers on a few documents by hand and counts on nobody double-checking. That is a con artist trick translated into a legal context. The fake emotional breakdown at the malpractice insurance office in Expenses is another Slippin' Jimmy play. The core skill, the ability to produce a convincing lie on demand with your body and voice, is the slip and fall reflex. The injury is faked. The injury is always faked. The only difference is the setting. When Saul Goodman arrives, fully, at the end of the fourth season, he is not a new invention. He is Slippin' Jimmy with a bar card. The suits are louder because Slippin' Jimmy never had a platform this big before. The commercials are tackier because Slippin' Jimmy never had access to a camera crew before. The scams are more expensive because the clients can pay more. But the guy running them is the same guy who was selling fake Rolexes in a Chicago alley. Saul Goodman is what Slippin' Jimmy becomes when Slippin' Jimmy finally gets a license to steal legally. The irony the show is playing with, from the moment the character adopts the name, is that going to law school did not change the thief. It just changed the jurisdiction. This is why, when Kim Wexler leaves Jimmy in the apartment after Howard Hamlin's death, Saul Goodman springs into full existence within a single cut. It was never far away. It was the original voice. Kim had been keeping Slippin' Jimmy quiet, partly by her presence, partly because her own taste for cons gave Jimmy an outlet that did not require the full Saul performance. Without her, the performance had nowhere else to go. It went straight to full volume. The proof that Slippin' Jimmy never disappeared comes in the Omaha scenes, after Breaking Bad ends. The character we meet there is Gene Takovic, a quiet Cinnabon manager who is supposed to be the complete erasure of everything that came before. Glasses, a mustache, a Kansas City Royals lunch bag, a small, sad life. For a few seasons of Better Call Saul, the show lets the audience believe that Gene is what is left when every other identity has been stripped away. Then, in the sixth season's Omaha episode Nippy, Gene pulls a scam on an old woman named Marion, played by Carol Burnett. The scam involves faking a lost dog, manipulating her into letting him into her home, and setting up a long con that will result in the robbery of a department store. The Gene scam is, step for step, a Slippin' Jimmy scam. A helpless stranger, an engineered crisis, a kind face, a planted lie. The same muscles, the same instincts, the same rhythm. The man who was supposed to have vanished into a low-profile life in Nebraska is running the same play he ran on sidewalks in Cicero 40 years earlier. The law degree is gone. The loud suit is gone. The Albuquerque office is gone. Slippin' Jimmy is still there. Slippin' Jimmy, apparently, was always going to still be there. You cannot identity wipe him. Ed the Disappearer could only change the paperwork, not the man. There is one other piece of the Slippin' Jimmy DNA that follows Jimmy across his entire life, and it is a physical object. A pinky ring. Marco Pasternak, Jimmy's Chicago running partner, wore a specific pinky ring, a gold ring with a horseshoe and a dollar sign. The kind of ring a small-time con man wears because it looks expensive without actually being expensive. At the end of the first season of Better Call Saul, Jimmy returns to Chicago to run one last scam with Marco, during which Marco dies of a heart attack. Marco's mother gives Jimmy the pinky ring. Jimmy slides it onto his finger. From that moment forward, through the rest of Better Call Saul, through all of Saul Goodman's appearances on Breaking Bad, through every episode where he kidnaps Walter White, or launders drug money, or advises Jesse Pinkman, Jimmy McGill is wearing that ring. You can see it in almost every shot of his hand. The camera does not always draw attention to it. It does not have to. The ring is always there, on the hand of a man who is supposed to be somebody else now, quietly telling the audience who he really is. Slippin' Jimmy never left. He learned new vocabulary. He wore better clothes. He got a cable TV commercial budget. He stopped sleeping in cars. But the small Chicago kid who decided at 9 years old that the world was a game where the honest lose had been running the whole show the entire time. Every other version of the character was just the disguise he put on to keep running the con in a more profitable neighborhood. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which means that when that character eventually had to vanish, completely, from Albuquerque in a hurry, the new life he would be forced into was going to be a prison of a very specific kind. Because taking a man whose whole identity is motion and cleverness and performance and locking him inside a Cinnabon in Omaha, Nebraska, with nothing to do and no one to fool, is not a retirement. It is a punishment. Section 8. The Gene Takovic Era. Loneliness in Black and White. At the end of the Breaking Bad episode Granite State, which is the second to last episode of the entire original series, Saul Goodman sits in a small bunker underneath a vacuum repair shop in Albuquerque alongside Walter White. They are both waiting to be given new identities. They are both about to disappear. Saul, trying to make some sort of grim joke about his own future, tells Walter that the fun is over for him. He says that from that point on, he is going to be Mr. Low Profile. Just another guy with a job and 3 pairs of Dockers. If he is lucky, he says, best case scenario, he will be managing a Cinnabon in Omaha. The line was written as a throwaway. It was a dark punchline from a character who was known, by that point in the show, mostly for his dark punchlines. Nobody in the audience in 2013 had any reason to think the show was telling the truth about the character's future. They assumed Saul was going into some kind of witness protection situation, and that was that. Then, almost 2 years later, on February 8, 2015, the pilot episode of Better Call Saul opened not in Albuquerque, not in a courtroom, not with a flashy suit. It opened in a mall in Omaha, Nebraska, in a Cinnabon, in black and white. With the same man from the bunker, now older, quieter, balder, wearing glasses, with a mustache, rolling dough behind a counter. The throwaway line had been a promise. Better Call Saul was going to take it literally. That opening sequence, which appears as the cold open of the first 5 season premieres of the show, became one of the most unusual recurring structural choices in modern television. Every season of Better Call Saul, with one exception, started in black and white. Every season started in Omaha. Every season checked in with Gene Takovic, the Cinnabon manager, who was the man Saul Goodman had been forced to become after the Breaking Bad story was over. These scenes are not long, at least not at first. Each one is maybe 5 or 10 minutes. They build slowly across 5 seasons until, in the 6th and final season, Gene takes over multiple full episodes and becomes the setting for the climax of the entire saga. The choice to shoot Gene in black and white was deliberate. The color palette of both Breaking Bad and the main Better Call Saul timeline is famously saturated. Albuquerque on those shows is full of oranges and browns and rich desert tones. Bright yellow courtrooms, the colorful suits Saul wears in his strip mall office. Saul Goodman himself is, visually, one of the most colorful characters on television. His suits are aqua, purple, pink. His shirts are patterned. His ties are loud. Color is part of who he is. It is the visual equivalent of the pun in his name. It's all good, man, dressed up like a walking billboard. Gene Takovic has no color. Not because the camera happens to see him in black and white, because, visually, he has no color left. The world around him is drained. The Cinnabon is drained. His apartment is drained. Even the exterior shots of Omaha look washed out. The show is making a visual argument. Without the performance of Saul Goodman, without Albuquerque, without Kim, without Chuck, without any of the people and places that gave the main timeline its vibrancy, this man has gone monochrome. He is alive, barely. He is not living. The first Gene scene in the pilot is famous now for how much it communicates in how little time. Gene is behind the counter at the Cinnabon. He is rolling out dough. He is making a milkshake for a customer. A rough-looking man with tattoos walks past the counter and stares at him. Gene freezes. His face goes pale. He thinks he has been recognized. He thinks someone from his old life has finally tracked him down to Omaha. The man walks past him. The man hugs a woman on the other side of the food court. He was never looking at Gene. Gene, in that frozen half-second, has aged 10 years. His own panic is so constant that he mistakes a hug for a hit. After his shift, Gene goes home to a modest house. He eats dinner alone. He turns on the television. Nothing is on. Then, from a hidden spot in the wall of his own home, he pulls out a shoebox. Inside the shoebox are small keepsakes from his former life. A Band-Aid box full of coins, a few photographs, and a VHS tape. He puts the tape into a VCR. Onto the screen, in full color for the only time in the opening sequence, pop the old Saul Goodman commercials. "Better call Saul," they shout at him, in the loud, colorful voice of the man he used to be. Saul's face fills the screen, younger, flashier, shouting his catchphrases. The camera cuts back to Gene, sitting alone on his couch in the dark, watching himself. He is crying, quietly. The scene holds on his face. That is how the pilot ends. In a single scene, without a word of dialogue from Gene himself, the show has told you everything. He is in hiding. He is deeply lonely. He is afraid of being found. He is also, in some buried way, grieving the man he used to be. The shoebox, the VHS, the act of watching the old commercials. These are not the actions of someone who has left Saul Goodman behind. These are the actions of a widow. He is mourning himself. The Gene scenes continue in each subsequent season, and they build. In the second season's opening, Gene locks himself inside the Cinnabon trash room by accident. There is an emergency exit, but a sign on it warns that opening it will alert the police. Gene, terrified of any contact with authorities, chooses to sit inside the trash room for several hours until a janitor finally opens the door from the outside. While he waits, he uses a loose screw to scratch 3 letters into the wall. S.G., the initials of the man he used to be. He is alone, in a garbage room, and the only thing he can think to do is to write his old name where someone might someday see it. A message in a bottle, thrown into a place nobody will ever look. In the third season's opening, Gene is out on his lunch break when he witnesses a teenage shoplifter being chased by mall security. The kid hides in a photo booth. The security guards ask Gene if he saw where the shoplifter went. Gene points to the booth. Then, just as security is about to close in, Gene calls out to the kid, instinctively, the phrase that used to define his entire professional life. "Get a lawyer," he yells. "Just say nothing. Get a lawyer." It is the first time, since going into hiding, that he has let Saul Goodman speak out loud in public. After the scene ends, Gene returns to the Cinnabon, and during his shift, faints. The mental effort of staying silent is catching up with his body. The character cannot hold himself in much longer. In the 4th season's opening, Gene is taken to a hospital after his collapse. A nurse enters his driver's license information into a computer. There is a small computer error. The system rejects the name. For a moment, Gene thinks his real identity has been flagged. The show watches him calculate in real time how fast he can run out of the hospital and vanish again. The nurse realizes the error was hers and corrects it. Gene survives. But the scene has already shown the audience that his entire life in Omaha is one glitch away from ending. In the 5th season's opening, Gene has a cab ride with a driver named Jeff, who recognizes him. Jeff has seen the old Saul Goodman commercials. Jeff asks him, almost teasingly, to say the catchphrase. Gene denies being Saul at first. Then, trapped, he says it. "Better call Saul." Jeff lets him out of the cab with a chilling line. Jeff tells him he is never more than 5 minutes away. It is a threat dressed as a goodbye. That night, panicked, Gene calls Ed Galbraith, the disappearer, to arrange a second identity wipe. He pays. He is told where to meet. Then he hangs up, changes his mind, and calls Ed back with a new line. "I'm gonna fix it myself," Gene says. The audience, in 2020, watched that line land and understood what it meant. Saul Goodman was about to climb back out of the grave Gene had been keeping him in. Fixing it himself meant running a scam again. Meant using Slippin' Jimmy muscles he had not used in years. Meant risk. The 6th season turns those quiet openings into the final act of the entire show. In an episode called Nippy, we follow Gene full-time as he runs an elaborate con on Jeff, bringing Jeff into a department store heist that serves as blackmail insurance. He meets Jeff's mother, Marion, played by Carol Burnett, and manipulates her trust. The entire Nippy episode is in black and white. There are no flashbacks to Albuquerque. The show is telling us that this, right now, is Saul's life. This is the final chapter. He is going to keep running scams on smaller and smaller people in a grayer and grayer world until he dies in a Cinnabon. Then the show does something more interesting. In the last 2 Gene-focused episodes, Waterworks and the finale, Saul Gone, it lets Gene get too greedy. He tries to run a more aggressive scheme involving stealing from a man who is dying of cancer. Buddy, one of his accomplices, refuses to go through with it on moral grounds. Gene fires Buddy and tries to do it himself. Marion, Jeff's mother, realizes who Gene actually is. She has seen his old commercials on her computer. She confronts him. Gene tries to keep her quiet. She uses her life alert necklace to call the police. Gene runs. He is caught hiding in a dumpster behind a nearby house. The final arrest of Saul Goodman happens in filth behind a kind old woman's home because he could not stop himself from running one last con. That is what the Gene era is for. It is not an epilogue. It is the final proof of the character's tragedy. Saul Goodman had his empire taken away, his city taken away, his name taken away, his identity wiped, his face changed, his location hidden. He was given, in a legal and practical sense, a complete second chance at a quiet life. And he could not take it. The pull of the old self was too strong. Every time the show checked in with Gene over the course of 5 years, it was watching a man lose a war against himself in very slow motion. Each opening scene was a step further. The trash room, the photo booth, the hospital, the cab, the dumpster, the arrest. Gene Takovic is also the form in which the show finally accomplishes what it had been threatening for 6 seasons, which was to get Saul Goodman off screen entirely. Because by the end of the finale, Gene is gone too. He disappears the moment Jimmy McGill gets on the prison bus. Gene Takovic was a disguise. Saul Goodman was a performance. Slip-in Jimmy was a survival strategy. What is left, at the bottom of all of them, is the man Chuck McGill told to his face, years earlier, he had never really seen. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Something had to force that man back to the surface. Something had to crack the performance open for good. That something turned out to be a bullet fired in an apartment one night by a cartel killer named Lalo Salamanca into the head of a man who had never done anything worse to anyone than be a decent lawyer with a Namaste bumper sticker on his car. Section 9. Howard Hamlin and the Real Cost. When the scam stopped being funny. Howard Hamlin is one of the characters Better Call Saul spent the longest time making the audience misunderstand. From the moment he arrives in the pilot, Howard looks like a villain of a specific kind. He wears perfectly tailored suits. He has perfect hair. He drives a Jaguar. He runs the law firm Hamlin, and McGill, which has his face on the sign. He talks in a polished corporate voice. He denies Jimmy McGill the job Jimmy wants. He dismisses Kim Wexler in small ways. He seems, at a quick glance, exactly like the kind of privileged, smug, rich guy a show about a scrappy outsider lawyer would want you to root against. Patrick Fabian, the actor who played him, has said in interviews that the role was written across the early seasons in a way that almost dared the audience to hate Howard, to dismiss him, to treat him as just another obstacle in Jimmy's path. The show then spent 6 seasons slowly revealing that almost none of the audience's first impressions of Howard were true. Howard, it turns out, was the one who tried to hire Jimmy at Hamlin, and McGill. He is the one who gave Jimmy the affectionate nickname Charlie Hustle. He genuinely admired Jimmy's energy, his work ethic, his charisma, and saw him as a potential asset to the firm. The reason Jimmy was never hired was not because of Howard. It was because of Chuck McGill, who vetoed Jimmy privately and forced Howard to carry the weight of the rejection in public, so that Chuck would never have to tell his own brother the truth. Howard, for years, let Jimmy hate him. He let Jimmy think the no came from him. He did that because he was trying to protect Chuck, who was already fragile, from the damage that rejection would have done to the brothers' relationship. Howard took the blame for years so that Chuck would not have to. That is not the behavior of a villain. It is the behavior of a man who has been quietly carrying someone else's burden for so long that it has started to bend his spine. The show reveals more across the seasons. Howard was pushed toward running HHM by his own father, George Hamlin, the other H in the name, who expected him to inherit the firm whether Howard wanted it or not. Howard dealt with the weight of that expectation by becoming obsessive about appearances. The perfect suits, the perfect car, the perfect smile at the perfect charity event. Underneath it, Howard was lonely. His marriage was failing. He was sleeping in his own guest house for the better part of a year. He was suffering from depression. His law firm was in serious financial trouble, in part because of Chuck's exit and the massive payout it required. Howard was drowning, silently, behind a desk, in a suit, with his name on the door. And he handled it in the most Howard way possible. He went to therapy. He worked on himself. He started doing boxing as a form of stress release. He put a Namaste bumper sticker on his Jaguar, which the show uses as a kind of running joke, because it is exactly the embarrassingly sincere gesture a man like Howard would make while actually trying to become a better person. By the 6th season, Howard is the most emotionally mature man in the entire show. He is the only major character who is openly attempting to work through his own issues in a healthy way. He has grieved Chuck's suicide. He has attempted, awkwardly but genuinely, to make amends with Jimmy. He has even reached out to Kim privately, not to insult her or demean her, but because he has noticed that Jimmy's behavior is getting erratic and is worried about her safety. He handed Kim and Jimmy a gesture of reconciliation after Chuck's death, giving Jimmy a bequest and asking him to serve on a charitable board, which Kim angrily rejected on Jimmy's behalf. For their part, Jimmy and Kim decide in the 6th season to destroy him. The plan is elaborate. They want to derail a massive class action settlement that Howard is handling, a case called Sandpiper, which involves elder abuse at a retirement community. A quicker settlement would mean more money for Jimmy, who is owed a cut. Howard wants to wait for the full trial, where the payout would be larger but slower. Jimmy and Kim decide to get the case settled fast by destroying Howard's reputation with his own clients and colleagues. They will make Howard look like a drug addict. They will set up situations where Howard's eyes appear to be dilated. They will stage a fake payoff between Jimmy and Howard's private investigator. They will plant photographs. They will drug Howard's coffee with eye drops that mimic the effects of a high. They will do all of it in an escalating series of small, cruel, well-executed cons. The plan has a name inside the show. It is called the D-Day Plan, because Kim jokes about it that way. The plan works. At a high-stakes court-ordered mediation for the Sandpiper case, Howard appears in front of opposing counsel with his pupils looking like saucers. He tries to explain, correctly, that someone has been manipulating him and framing him. He tries to produce evidence which has been swapped out for innocuous photos. He sounds, under the stress and the unexpected drug effect, exactly like a paranoid addict accusing phantom enemies. The Sandpiper case ends up being settled immediately afterward, on terms much less favorable than Howard had worked for years to build. Howard is publicly humiliated in front of his clients, his colleagues, and the opposing lawyers. Jimmy gets his payday. Kim celebrates. That evening, Howard pieces together what has happened. Slowly, methodically, in the way a career lawyer would. He traces the con back to Jimmy and Kim. He drives to their apartment. He knocks on their door. He is calm. He is, in fact, the calmest person in the scene that follows. He walks into their living room and he lays out what he has figured out, step by step. He calls Jimmy a low-functioning person and calls Kim, with cutting accuracy, one of the smartest and most promising human beings he has ever known. He asks directly why they did this to him. He does not yell. He is simply trying to understand. Then he delivers the line that is the moral backbone of the entire 6th season. He looks at Jimmy and Kim sitting on their couch, and he says, "You two are soulless." He goes further. He tells Jimmy that he cannot help himself, that Chuck knew this about him, that Jimmy was born that way. And he turns to Kim and says, "You have a piece missing." He is right, and the show knows he is right, and Jimmy and Kim know he is right. The scene has no background music. There are no cuts away to distract you. Patrick Fabian plays it quietly, without visible rage, which is what makes it so much more damaging than yelling would have been. This is a man who has spent the day being publicly destroyed, and he has used the energy to drive to the apartment of the people who did it to him, not to assault them, not to threaten them, but to simply tell them, to their faces, what they are. That scene is the moment the audience's sympathy for Jimmy and Kim cracks.
Because Howard is not wrong.
And then, while Howard is still in the middle of saying all of this, there is a knock at the door. The door opens. Lalo Salamanca walks in. Lalo is the cartel member who Jimmy and Kim thought was dead for most of the 6th season. He is not dead. He has come to their apartment on an entirely unrelated mission. He is there to force Jimmy to give him information about Gus Fring's hidden meth lab. He has no idea who Howard Hamlin is. He does not know about the Sandpiper case. He does not know about the D-Day plan. He simply walks into an apartment where he was expecting to find 2 people and finds 3. Howard, confused, still processing his own emotional state, still in the middle of the most morally clear speech of his life, turns to Lalo. Kim, terrified, urges Howard to leave. Howard begins to explain, politely, that he was in the middle of something. Lalo pulls a small pistol out of his jacket. He calmly screws a silencer onto it, in full view of all 3 of them. Howard, realizing almost too late what is about to happen, tries one more sentence. He says, "I think I'm in the middle of something." Lalo shoots Howard Hamlin in the head mid-sentence. Howard's body collapses onto the coffee table, his head striking the corner of it on the way down, in a shot that, on purpose, mirrors the fall Chuck had in a copy shop years earlier. Jimmy and Kim scream. Lalo shushes them and says, calmly, "Let's talk." The episode, titled Plan and Execution, ends there. That cliffhanger is one of the most famous endings of any episode in the entire Breaking Bad universe. The episode has a 9.9 out of 10 rating on IMDb, which is the highest-rated episode of the entire franchise. It surpasses Chicanery. It surpasses Ozymandias. It surpasses the finales of both shows. The writer and director Thomas Schnauz has said in interviews that the team always knew something bad had to happen as a result of the scam, because letting Jimmy and Kim win cleanly would have made the show morally dishonest. They tried many different ideas before landing on Howard's death. Patrick Fabian has said he only found out about 2 weeks before filming that his character would die in that episode, and that the writers told him Howard's death was designed to be a hinge that swings the rest of the season open. It does exactly that. Because Howard's death is not the end of Howard's influence, it is the beginning of it. Howard's death is the moment when the show and the audience stop being able to enjoy Jimmy and Kim's schemes. Up until that moment, the cons had been fun. The Mesa Verde blueprint swap was fun. The Huel Babineau hometown hero fake-out was fun. Even parts of the early D-Day plan were played almost as comedy. Then Howard is dead on their floor. A body they have to dispose of. A wife who will never know what really happened to him. A reputation that will carry a rumor of suicide for the rest of time. Jimmy and Kim are now, in the most literal sense, the cause of another person's death, even if the bullet came from someone else. The show makes a specific point about this. Howard could have survived. If Jimmy and Kim had not been running their campaign against him, Howard would not have been in their apartment that night. He would not have been there to be shot. The bullet came from Lalo, but the reason Howard was in the room to take it came from them. The cover-up afterward makes it worse. Jimmy and Kim bury Howard. They help Lalo cover up the murder. They tell Howard's wife, Cheryl, and his firm that Howard disappeared, strung out, likely a suicide. They allow the world to think Howard ended his own life the same way Chuck did, after years of Howard actually working to become a better person. Kim cannot live with it. That is the engine of her exit from Jimmy's life. A scene later in the season shows Kim, now divorced, now working in Florida at a sprinkler company, visiting a public defender's office, where she briefly breaks down in silent, full-body sobs on a bus, which the show holds on for almost a full minute without music. That is the weight Howard Hamlin leaves behind. Nobody grieves him publicly. Kim grieves him alone, silently, on a bus, years later. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That is the cost. That is the moment Better Call Saul stops being a show about a con artist who makes questionable choices and becomes a show about two people who helped get a good man killed. There is no undoing it. There is no con that fixes it. There is no scheme that brings Howard back. The only thing left, for Jimmy, is what a man can do about a thing like that when he finally, eventually, runs out of places to hide from it. And for a long time, for years, the answer he gives is nothing. He runs. He lives as Saul. He lives as Gene. He survives. Until the day, standing in a federal courtroom in Albuquerque, he finally stops. Section 10. Saul gone. The only anti-hero who actually chose something. The series finale of Better Call Saul is called Saul Gone. It aired on AMC on August 15, 2022. It was written and directed by Peter Gould, the same man who wrote the original Breaking Bad episode that introduced Saul Goodman back in 2009. 13 years of the character, start to finish, were opened and closed by the same writer. The finale is 63 minutes long. It is the 13th and final episode of the 6th season. An estimated 1.80 million viewers watched it on the night it first aired. It received near universal critical acclaim. Multiple critics, including Daniel Daddario at Variety, said openly that they felt it was a superior finale to Breaking Bad's own final episode, Felina. The events of the episode need to be walked through carefully, because almost every choice in it is a deliberate inversion of what prestige television endings usually do. The episode opens with Gene Takovic on the run in Omaha, after Marion, Jeff's mother, calls the police on him using her life alert necklace. Gene sprints back to his house. He grabs an emergency stash of diamonds he has hidden away. He tries to flee. He hides inside a dumpster behind a house in a residential neighborhood. While he is in there, he fumbles a tin of diamonds and scatters them across the garbage. He tries to dig through it for a phone. The police find him. He is pulled out of the dumpster in cuffs. That is the final arrest of the man who was once Saul Goodman. Not in a shootout, not in a standoff, not in a dramatic chase. Covered in trash in a suburban alley, clutching spilled diamonds. He is extradited back to Albuquerque. On the flight, he convinces a federal prosecutor that he is willing to cooperate in a massive way. He hires Bill Oakley, a local defense attorney who has appeared in small roles throughout both shows, to serve as his advisory counsel. He sits down across the table from multiple federal prosecutors and begins negotiating. This is the last full-scale performance Saul Goodman ever gives. It is him at the height of his powers. He reminds the prosecutors that he was a victim of Walter White, kidnapped at gunpoint, terrorized, forced into cooperation under threat. He tells them he has information. He names prices. He negotiates down from what should have been a sentence of over 100 years all the way to 7 years, with the added condition of ice cream on Fridays. Bill Oakley, watching this, is stunned. He tells Jimmy it is the greatest plea deal he has ever seen. Saul Goodman smiles. Then Marie Schrader walks in. Marie is the widow of Hank Schrader, the DEA agent who was killed in the desert in the final season of Breaking Bad, partly because of Walter White's actions. Betsy Brandt reprises the role for this episode, the first time the character has appeared since Breaking Bad ended. Marie looks at Saul, who is wearing an ankle bracelet and a fresh suit, and she tells him, with a steady voice, that when they told her they found him in a dumpster, it made sense. She tells him about her husband. She tells him about her widowhood. She tells him about the funeral. She is not there to negotiate. She is there to remind him, and the audience, that Saul's jokey negotiations with federal prosecutors are happening while families are still burying the dead that his old clients caused. That scene is the first crack. The second crack comes when Jimmy learns, through Bill Oakley, that Kim Wexler has independently filed a legal affidavit confessing her own role in Howard Hamlin's death a month earlier. Kim has already admitted, in writing, what she did. She has handed it over to Howard's widow. She has delivered the truth to the one person it would wound most. She has done this without telling Jimmy. She has done this without being forced to. She has done this because she could not keep carrying it, and because she decided that the only honest thing left was to let Howard's widow choose what to do with the knowledge. Jimmy, hearing this, goes silent. He tries to use the information about Howard's death as extra leverage in his plea deal. He tells the prosecutors he has more details about the Hamlin case that nobody else has. He requests that Kim be summoned to the sentencing as a witness. On the day of the sentencing, Jimmy walks into an Albuquerque federal courtroom in a full Saul Goodman suit. Wild colors, bold tie, oversized pocket square. It is, in the black and white scenes of the present, the loudest visual reminder of the character he has spent years playing. Kim is in the back row. Marie is there. Blanca Gomez, the widow of Hank's murdered partner Stephen Gomez, is there. Bill Oakley is at the defense table. The prosecutor stands up to summarize the deal. Jimmy asks, politely, if he may address the court directly. The judge allows it. He gets up. He begins telling the story he was going to tell. He explains that he was kidnapped by Walter White. He explains that he was forced into working for a meth empire under threat of death. He explains that he did what he had to do to survive. He is giving the speech he has already given to the prosecutors. He is running the Saul Goodman con one last time, in public, under oath. And then, without announcement, he stops. He looks at Kim in the back row. He exhales. He tells the judge that what he just said is not true. He tells the judge that he was not a victim. He tells the court that Walter White did in fact kidnap him initially, but that after that first meeting, he was a willing and enthusiastic architect of the entire Heisenberg operation. He says he could have walked away. He says he did not. He admits that without him, Walter White's drug empire would have collapsed. He admits that he was not afraid of Walter White. He admits that he enjoyed the work. Then he goes further. He admits to his role in Howard Hamlin's death. He admits that he and Kim ran the scheme that destroyed Howard's reputation. He acknowledges that Howard was murdered in his apartment by a cartel member, and that while he did not pull the trigger, Howard would not have been in that room if not for the two of them. Then he goes further again. He confesses, on the record, that he pushed his own brother Chuck to the point of suicide through years of manipulation, betrayal, and specifically the insurance scam he ran after winning his bar hearing. Bill Oakley interrupts to point out that what Jimmy did to Chuck was not technically illegal. Jimmy, without turning away from the bench, quietly says, "Yes, it was." And then he states, for the record, that his name is not Saul Goodman. His name is James McGill. He wants the record to reflect that. The courtroom erupts. The prosecutors are stunned. The plea deal is torn up on the spot. Bill Oakley is frozen. Kim Wexler, in the back row, is crying silently. The judge hands down a sentence based on the actual crimes Jimmy has now admitted to. The final sentence is 86 years in a federal prison. There is a detail in the number 86 that the show did not invent, but definitely chose on purpose. In American restaurant and bar slang, to 86 something means to remove it from the menu. When a dish is 86th, it is gone. It is no longer available. It does not exist anymore. The sentence Jimmy is given is both a number and a statement. Saul Goodman, the persona, has been 86th, taken off the menu, not served here anymore. One more piece falls into place. The finale uses flashbacks throughout the episode. Some of them are set during Breaking Bad, some during earlier seasons of Better Call Saul. In each flashback, a version of Jimmy has a conversation with someone about time machines. He asks Mike Ehrmantraut, when they are trapped in the desert, what he would do if he had a time machine. Mike says he would go back and stop himself from taking his first bribe as a police officer. Jimmy says he would go back and invest early in Warren Buffett's company and become a trillionaire. Later, in a flashback to Breaking Bad, he asks Walter White the same question. Walter says he would go back to when he walked away from a company called Gray Matter, which he helped found and which went on to make billions without him. Both men give their answers. Both men criticize Jimmy for giving a shallow answer about money. Jimmy laughs them off. The last flashback is different. It is set in Chuck McGill's home during the early days of Chuck's electromagnetic hypersensitivity, before most of the show ever happened. Jimmy has dropped off groceries. Chuck is reading a book by lantern light. Jimmy is on his way out the door. Chuck calls after him and invites him to stay and talk for a while. Chuck offers to hear about Jimmy's cases. Chuck, in a rare gentle moment, says to Jimmy, "If you don't like where you're headed, there's no shame in going back and changing your path." Jimmy brushes him off. He leaves. The camera then lingers on the book Chuck was reading. It is H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. That is the point. Every version of the time machine question Jimmy was asked throughout his life, he answered wrong. He answered with money. He answered with self-interest. He answered with jokes. The one person who gave him the right answer, without asking the question at all, was Chuck. And Jimmy was not listening. The whole finale is structured around the idea that Jimmy's confession in court is him finally, decades too late, giving the right answer. Not by literally going back in time, by accepting the consequences of not having gone back. The final sequence of the show is almost silent. Jimmy is sentenced. He is put on a prison bus to ADX Montrose, a federal facility in Colorado. On the bus, the other inmates recognize him. One starts chanting his old catchphrase. Others join in. "Better call Saul. Better call Saul." A whole bus of convicted men chanting the slogan of the man who, in many cases, represented them. Jimmy smiles. He does not correct them. He lets them have it. Then he closes his eyes. At the prison, in an eventual visitation, Kim Wexler comes to see him. Her New Mexico bar card, which has no expiration date, lets her in as his attorney. They sit in a small room. He has a cigarette. She lights it. They pass it back and forth, leaning against a wall, the way they used to lean against the wall of the HHM parking garage, when they were both nobodies in a mailroom. They talk quietly. They do not embrace. They do not make promises. Kim gets up to leave. Jimmy walks out into the prison yard as she crosses the grounds. He puts his hands up and forms them into the shape of finger guns. She looks back at him once. She keeps walking. She is gone. That is the last image of the character. A man in a federal prison jumpsuit, finger guns raised toward a woman walking away. The same small gesture she once made to him at the end of the 4th season. No other television anti-hero of the last 20 years has ended his story the way Jimmy McGill ends his. Tony Soprano cuts to black, unresolved. Walter White dies smiling on a meth lab floor to baby blue. Don Draper invents a Coca-Cola commercial. Logan Roy's children inherit and destroy themselves. In every one of those cases, the character either dies, gets away, or leaves in a state of ambiguity the audience has to argue about. Only Jimmy McGill makes a choice, on screen, in open court, under oath, watched by the woman he loves, to stop running. He could have taken 7 years. He took 86. He could have stayed Saul. He became Jimmy again. He could have been released into the same life with a different name. He locked the door behind him. That is why this character is the best one television has ever produced. Not because he was the funniest, which he often was. Not because he was the most quotable, which he absolutely was. Not because Bob Odenkirk gave the best sustained performance in drama in the last decade, although a very strong case can be made that he did. He is the best because, unlike any of the other great anti-heroes, his story ends with a man choosing a harder, truer version of himself over an easier, louder one, and paying the full price for that choice in a currency the audience can understand. 86 years, the rest of his natural life, gone from the menu. And somewhere in a federal prison in Colorado, a man named Jimmy McGill, who was once Saul Goodman, who was once Gene Takovic, who was once Slippin' Jimmy, who was once a mailroom clerk, who was once a kid stealing from his own father's cash register in a corner store in Cicero, Illinois, sits in a jumpsuit and remembers what it felt like to finally tell the truth. That is where the story ends. That is where every thread the show ever started ties off. That is where the argument for this character being the greatest in the history of television stops being an argument and becomes simply the ending he earned. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.